Protis. I'm a strategy director at Complete College America. And I'm really excited to introduce Becky Klein-Collins, Matt Bergman, and Jason Taylor for today's webinar on credit for competency. Becky Klein-Collins is the Vice President for Impact at the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, or CAEL. In this role, she develops strategic partnerships, advocates for adult learners, manages research initiatives, and oversees the development of public-facing resources. Throughout her career, Becky's work has focused on prior learning assessment, competency-based education, public policy change, and system transforming practices in workforce development. In 2018, she published Never Too Late, the Adult Student's Guide to College. Dr. Matt Bergman, PhD, is an associate professor at the University of Louisville and is the author of Unfinished Business, Compelling Stories of Adult Student Persistence. Dr. Bergman's research is focused on student persistence, prior learning assessment, leadership, and degree completion programs. His work has been highlighted in international media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Chronicle of Higher Education, National Public Radio, and Time Magazine. His program was the recipient of the 2019 ACHE Distinguished Program Award and the 2019 AAACE Curriculum Innovation Award and the 2013 AAACE Malcolm Knowles Award for Adult Education Program of the Year. Dr. Bergman was awarded the 2018 ACHE South Outstanding Faculty Award, the Metroversity Outstanding Faculty for Adult Learners in 2015, and was a top 4 faculty favorite at University of Louisville in 2020-2021. He is also a fellow at Complete College America that serves as a teacher, administrator, ambassador of degree attainment both locally and nationally. And finally, Dr. Jason Taylor is an associate professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy at the University of Utah. His scholarship investigates how higher education policies shape educational opportunities for marginalized and underrepresented college students, particularly in the community college sector. He has studied issues and policies such as dual and concurrent enrollment, transfer and articulation, reverse credit transfer, adult re-engagement, college affordability, prior learning assessment, and LGBTQ+ students and policies. Dr. Taylor also serves as the Director of Transfer Pathways at the University of Utah, where he leads efforts to develop more equitable and effective transfer pathways for students. So as you can see, we have an amazing group of presenters today. And with that, I will turn it over to Becky, who's going to get us started.
Okay, let me juggle my screens for a second. Just give me 1 minute here. All right, I think we've got my slide up. So thank you so much for having us, Brandon. We're all 3 of us very happy to be here to talk about credit for competency. So what we're going to cover what we mean by credit for competency, what the 3 of us have learned about how powerful it can be and particularly from our latest research. We're going to talk about how it works within individual colleges and how systems and states can support it. So first, I want to just acknowledge the moment that we're currently in. Many of us in higher ed have just finished or in the process of finishing one of the most challenging academic years in recent memory. COVID case numbers now are dropping, obviously, and we seem to be in a transition toward more normal times, but we're going to have a little bit of a hangover for a while. For many Americans, the disruptions have been huge. So job losses were big early on in the pandemic with some recovery since then. And disruptions in education were pretty profound. Strata Education Network, which is CAEL's parent organization, has been studying work and learning throughout the pandemic. They call this special survey project that they've been working on Public Viewpoint. And if you are not familiar with their work, I would encourage you to take a look. It's interesting stuff. The data on this slide right here is from their latest results. Since the start of the pandemic, more than 1/3 of adults have had to change or cancel their education plans, including 2 in every 3 young adults and 3 in 5 Latinos. 2/5 of these disrupted learners have canceled their plans altogether. Now, there are some signs that things are coming back a little bit. Also from the Strata survey, among US adults who experienced a work-related change, 7% have enrolled in an education program, and 37% say they intend to enroll in an education program within the next 6 months. And of those whose learning was disrupted by the pandemic, 33% are currently enrolled and 35% intend to enroll in the near future. Now we can imagine that the learners whose programs have been disrupted or their plans have been disrupted and they want to get back, they're going to feel a little bit frustrated by the time that they have lost in this last year and a half. They're not going to want to waste their time in courses that they don't need, and they're going to want to get to the finish line as quickly as possible. Now, this is always the case for adult learners to really cut the time and cost and so on. But this group in particular is going to feel this more than ever. And when it comes to credential completion and accelerating credential completion, one strategy is to offer more ways for people to build on what they already know and make that count towards a degree or other credential. And that's where we start talking about awarding credit for competency. Evaluating and recognizing a student's skills and competencies for college credit, there are lots of different ways to approach this. So many of you may be very familiar with competency-based education or CBE programs. CBE refers to more of a comprehensive curricular approach to learning and post-secondary credentials. Today, we're going to be focusing on a slightly different approach to awarding credit for competency that can be incorporated into CBE programs, but it also can be incorporated into time-based or credit-based programs. And that's the assessment of a student's prior learning for college credit. Now, what do we mean by prior learning? Adult learners are often people who are coming to post-secondary learning with a lot of life experience. They've been in the workforce, or they've been raising families, they've been in the military. They're people with full lives and years of learning from their various work and life experiences. Some of that learning has been formal, like through professional licensing or certification programs, but a lot of it has been informal learning on the job or learning while doing work in the community. That learning also has value. A lot of it can be sophisticated, relevant to workplace needs, transferable to other situations, and comparable to the kinds of learning that takes place in a college classroom. Now, the evaluation of this kind of prior learning for college credit, we typically call this kind of process or credit award PLA, or prior learning assessment. Another term is CPL, or credit for prior learning. Those are typically the two terms that are used for this kind of process of awarding credit. Now, at CAEL, we tend to use those terms interchangeably, PLA and CPL, but some institutions or organizations kind of define them differently. But I just want to make sure we're all talking about the same thing when we're talking about PLA or CPL today. And what I'm talking about and what we're talking about today is a collection of methods that are used to evaluate a student's prior learning. And the methods really vary a lot. On the screen are a list of just some of the kinds of assessments that can be used. There are methods where an individual student demonstrates their learning and presents that for evaluation, and that includes standardized third-party exams like the CLEP test. Also includes challenge exams that might be developed in-house by faculty, or when a student creates a portfolio of their learning, really sort of documents their learning and writes a written narrative to accompany that documentation, and then that is evaluated by faculty. That's called portfolio assessment. But there are also methods where the institution or a third party evaluates formal training programs, like training that takes place in corporate settings, in the military, or through industry-sponsored certifications. So those are also methods of PLA. So there are lots of reasons why institutions offer credit for a student's prior learning or competency. To me, one of the main reasons really should be because it's the right thing to do. Learning is learning, regardless of where or how it is acquired. In addition, institutions like to offer PLA as a way to help students save both time and money in earning their degrees. Like I said at the start of this presentation, we are in a place where students are going to be very anxious to get to the finish line and make up for lost time. So saving time and money is really important. But we have heard at CAEL from PLA administrators for years and years and decades that PLA also has a motivating effect, which can help keep students focused on their studies and help them persist and finish their credentials. So recently, CAEL teamed up with WICHE to study this question about the connection between PLA credit earning and better completion rates. And we invited Jason Taylor from the University of Utah to help us out with some of the analysis. And so Jason's going to join me in sharing with you the main findings of this work. And then Matt is here to he's representing the University of Louisville, which was one of the 72 post-secondary institutions that participated in the study. So for this study, we used student record data from more than 230,000 adult students who were enrolled at 72 post-secondary institutions. We had all sectors represented, but particularly noteworthy was the participation of 30 community colleges. We tracked these students' educational activities from their matriculation in the 2011-2012 academic year through the end of 2018 calendar year. What we found was that about 11% of those students that we were studying in our sample had earned any sort of PLA credits at all. So some sort of PLA credit earning. And those students typically earned an average of about 15 credits from PLA. Now, the usage really varied quite a bit, and the credit earning varied quite a bit across the types of institutions, the different student groups. The highest rate of credit earning was by veterans or current service members. We sort of grouped those two populations together. So the military connected students, the highest rate, so that's the highest rate. The lowest was for community college students, as well as Black and low income students. We'll touch on that a little bit more in a few minutes. The real highlight of the study's findings was the benefits to students with PLA. First of all, PLA does save time and money. Based on the number of credits that they earned and the fees that their institutions charged for the methods of PLA that were used, we estimated that the tuition saved by these students ranged from about $1,500 for the adults at community colleges in our study to $3,800 for adults at four-year public institutions, a little over $10,000 for those at four-year private institution, and about $6,100 for those at for-profits. In terms of time saving, for those who completed degrees, we estimated that PLA saved approximately 9 to 14 months from the overall time required to complete a degree. Again, that's going to vary quite a bit depending on the student's enrollment intensity and lots of other factors. So now I'm going to hand over to Jason to talk a little bit about PLA and credential completion, which is where his role in the analysis came in.
Great, thanks, Becky, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you and join this conversation. So, as Becky mentioned, some of the really valuable findings from this study had to do with completion. And what we found was that adult students with PLA were far more likely to complete degrees and other credentials compared to students without. And you can see the descriptive outcomes on the left, that only 27% of the adult students without PLA completed a credential compared to 49 students with PLA. We also used some advanced statistical modeling with the data to make sure we were controlling for other factors and student characteristics and institutional environments to sort of compare PLA students to similar non-PLA students. And when we did that, we found that PLA credits boosted completion rates by 17%, which is quite significant for this type of study. So these are impressive findings suggesting that PLA could really be an important tool for credential completion. So this is all good news, and PLA has a number of benefits for students. The biggest being a strong effect on credit completion. But let's turn to equity, because we also found some really interesting and good news on the completion front when we looked at the results from an equity perspective. We see that PLA helped to boost completion of the student groups that we care about, Black and Hispanic students, Pell Grant recipients, so those who are low-income students, and students at community colleges. So again, PLA has great promise to be a tool for boosting credential completion, also saving money and time doing so. But the problem we found in the data was generally low usage of PLA, and as Becky mentioned before, only about 1 in 10 students used PLA at all on average. We found even lower usage for students who were Black, lower income, and who were enrolled at the community colleges. So we essentially have an access problem or an opportunity gap when it comes to PLA. The next slide, please. So one concern that a lot of institutions have is, hey, with PLA, are we basically losing money when it comes to tuition revenue? I know I've heard this in my state. Students save money, but are we losing money? And in fact, the answer is probably not. As Becky, as I noted before, students with PLA were more likely to stay enrolled and complete their degrees. And the result is that they were more likely to take more tuition-based courses from their institution compared to the non-PLA students. And ultimately that translated into them taking about 17 more course credits than non-PLA students. So PLA benefits the colleges themselves in terms of better graduation rates, and the financial downsides are really not at all that evident. So I'm going to wrap up here with sort of in anticipation of this webinar. We drafted a blog where Becky, Matt, and I had a conversation about PLA and asked me to sort of reflect a little bit on my experience as a higher education researcher with really little, relatively little knowledge of PLA or experience with PLA coming into this to the project, and the link is in the chat there. So I wanted to share with you a couple of these reflections. So the first is, that I think this work and study for me really reinforced the need for higher education researchers to expand the repertoire of our research and really think about research on non-traditional learning modalities. A lot of higher education research focuses on the brick and mortar model, but I think what we miss out on are the types of models that we need to expand access to. And as the result of this study shows, students of color, low-income students really benefit quite well from PLA. So we need to study. We need to do a better job of studying, looking outside our traditional modalities of learning. The other thing we sort of wrote about is sort of what I would say to PLA skeptics. And I sort of thought about this from two perspectives. One is the philosophical, is sort of at the philosophical level. And Becky sort of talked about, why institutions should do PLA, because it's the right thing to do. And I think it's the right thing to do because, one purpose of higher ed is to help our students and help individuals grow and develop. And I think PLA really does this because it affirms their existing knowledge and skills. And when institutions don't do PLA, I think, we're just making them relearn things that they already know. So really PLA, I think, is in strong alignment with the purpose of higher education. It's important to think about that. And then at the practical level, one of my takeaways from this project is really listening to probably many of you or your colleagues who administer PLA programs, listening to them and to students who have benefited from PLA. I think skeptics really could think about, could hear from those voices and learn about how PLA works, mechanisms to ensure quality, and really then the true value of PLA. And then follow the evidence as this study and even the prior study of PLA from about 10 years ago suggested. PLA works, and it works for our most marginalized student groups. And so that should be a very compelling reason to really seriously think about and reconsider PLA. And then I'll end with just sort of the connection to transfer. Brandon mentioned one of my roles on our campus is thinking about transfer, and I also study transfer. And one of the big issues we're concerned about with transfer is credit loss, because so many students transfer and their credits don't count. And I really think it's useful to conceptualize PLA as a credit loss issue, because students have the learning, but they don't have the credit in the currency of higher education. And this has profound implications on things like, the amount of money that students will ultimately pay in tuition and debt and so forth. So I think it's useful to sort of think about PLA or not offering PLA as a form of credit loss. Students really have that learning, and we should recognize it with their credit. So with that, I'll pause and turn it back over to Becky for the implications.
Thanks, Jason. Oops, I think I lost my video. Is my video? Okay. There I am. Okay, so yeah, I love the connection between PLA and transfer. That's another really important one that we're seeing more and more of as institutions and systems start to look at their transfer policies overall. They are incorporating PLA into that, and I think that's an important way to recognize prior learning. I want to just summarize before handing it over to Matt to give us more of a sort of on the ground perspective on PLA. Just a few takeaways. First, the takeaway from the research, the big one is that PLA improves completion rates, even when you're control for a wide range of student and institutional factors. But we also see that the usage rates are lower than we'd like to see. And we see that we have some work to do in terms of access to PLA and equity. So when we think about the implications, one thing to really focus on is the importance of communication. There are some studies that show that PLA is treated like a secret club sometimes within institutions. So it's there, but students don't know about it. So that's really no way to house your secret weapon. Ensuring that students are informed about it, know about it, that's the best way to make sure they know how to use it. Another important strategy is systemic and proactive advising focused on PLA. Should be one of the first things addressed by advisors when they do an initial assessment of students and what they're bringing to their learning. But also there should be repeated contact at every sort of touch point that a student has with the institution. And then finally, data and evaluation. It's going to be important as you're looking at your own PLA programs to look at your own data and see what it tells you about how your students are using PLA and whether there are difference in PLA usage that so you're not exacerbating inequalities that already exist in sort of educational outcomes. So good tracking and regular review of that data is really important. So now I want to turn it over to Matt, who's going to go some on the ground, and he's our roving reporter today. So we'll turn it over to him. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Becky. And just from the anonymous attendee in the Q&A, we've got a question. Is there a guidebook for colleges to use for developing portfolio review program in the institution? And then do accreditors have any say over PLA? The first answer is yes. There are a range of guidebooks, including the one from CAEL. There is a Earn Credit for What You Know, edited and authored by Janet Colvin, and we're working on the possibility of updating that book alongside the Prior Learning Assessment Network. So anybody that's interested in joining the Prior Learning Assessment Network can reach out to me via email or my colleague Nan Travers or Melissa DeBloy. So just send me a note at matt.bergman@louisville.edu if you want to learn more about that or any guidebook. We're happy to share some of those things. As well as the accreditors, they have influence on how we are accredited. So those are important pieces that we have to consider. And we've gone through that. We're in the SACS, Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, and we've gone through that and we've been vetted and everything is good to go with our prior learning assessment program. And speaking of which, I wanted to show everybody just the on-the-ground look at what a program might look like if you were considering starting or if you're evolving with your own program and incorporating PLA. We really try to focus on making this very streamlined and straightforward to our students so they understand the value proposition, there for you if you jump in and engage in a degree completion program or a discipline-focused program that really focuses on working adults. At the University of Louisville, we have 23,000 students. About 16 to 17,000 of those are undergraduates, and only 2,000 are adult learners, 25 or older. So we don't have a huge number of adults, and we're not totally focused on adults. We're very traditional institutions. Many of the people that know about the University of Louisville know that. But we're fighting the good fight, and we're trying to create pathways for individuals to come back via PLA and a focused discipline or an interdisciplinary approach. That approach is focused on basically 3 key pieces, and that is the general education, which is necessary of any degree worth its salt. We have 31 credit hours there, and it's called the Cardinal Core. The major is focused on 12 classes and 36 credit hours. And that gets bumped up to 45 because every student that comes into the organizational leadership program at the University of Louisville is required to take at least 9 of those hours in PLA towards their major, so that we meet SAC's requirements. But the final piece of that PLA is up to 48 credit hours towards their degree in prior learning assessment. So this is a huge benefit to them and offers up to $20,000 in savings. So we look at college level and credit-worthy learning, and we diagnose and assess that in a 3 credit hour class that I'm willing to share the entire course curriculum and have done for many schools across the country, so that we can move towards an idea of standardizing this and approaching this in a way that works for every institution. Now, we understand that 48 is not possible for every institution. The average that our students get is 24.6. And I know from the study it was 15. So it's all over the map when you think about national accumulation of credit through PLA or CPL. And we're right there on the top line of that. And we're proud of that, but we want to grow that across the university and then across the Commonwealth and beyond. Next slide, please. So go back one, please. So basically, the portfolio process is very straightforward. Sorry, go one forward there. Okay, that'll do. Right there, required validating documents alongside narratives. So I want you all to understand that this is a relevant, rigorous, and research-based approach to analyzing learning that happens outside the confines of the college walls. So we need validating documents alongside our process of doing life learning narratives through the cold experiential learning model to identify and demonstrate mastery. So not only do they have to have the relevant documentation, but they also have to write in a way that demonstrates the mastery of the content or specific focus area or discipline. Next slide. So as far as putting this together, and this is relevant for just about everybody. If you go through the CAEL course of understanding how to develop a portfolio, if you go to any institution that does this, you look at how one would compile a portfolio via credit for prior learning or prior learning assessment. And we start with the idea of doing a collection of the evolution of a person's experience in the workplace. So we look at career field training, we look at specialized training, and we do that all in the cold experiential learning model. Then we go into, we have a lot of military students, we use the joint services transcript and other occupational focus areas of expertise within the military, alongside the ONET, which is the Occupational Network database of learning from knowledge, skills, and abilities in specific job fields in the workforce. And then we put all those validating documents together and then match that up with some reflective essays that culminates in an overall portfolio. So we start with an autobiography and kind of look at a list view resume and start to cherry pick things out that match to courses or competencies that would be college level credit worthy. So at the University of Louisville, we've been doing this since the 90s. So it's been around an awful long time, and we've modeled everything we've done off of CAEL, but also off of our my colleagues at the Prior Learning Assessment Network, and learning just right hand in hand with Becky and Nan Travers and those folks that are really blazing a trail for PLA. So I'll go ahead and turn it back to Becky, but I'll hang around and I'd love to answer any questions that you have on practical implications.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. I just want to cover one more thing before we open it up for questions. I know that some folks have started putting questions in the chat and the Q&A box, and we're trying to capture them as we go. I just wanted to make one comment about state and system policies, because I know the Complete College America audience is often very focused on state policy change and tools as well. In general, states and systems tend to refrain from being too prescriptive about how PLA is offered and the specifics of institutional policies on the awarding of credit. But there are, there is an important function for harmonizing policies within the same system, so that there's a general sense of that all the institutions within a system are kind of treating PLA in the same way, although there might be some differences from institution to institution in terms of how it's administered. And there's real value in states and systems setting policies that help to increase the usage of PLA. Are policies that encourage greater transparency so that students know about PLA and how it works and what the policies are. State and system policies can expand the uses of PLA credit within a student's degree plan. They can lower costs for the student and expand methods for awarding credit. There's been a lot of different pieces written about PLA and state policy and system policy over the last 10 years or so. The most recent one piece is a research brief by Witchy, and I'll put it in the chat box once I'm done talking. A research brief by Witchy and class last year. You'll see it's mentioned here at the bottom of this slide, the current state of prior learning policies from last year as part of the Witchy Landscape series on PLA that they did last year, that our research is a part of that effort as well. But this is, if you're interested in this, I encourage you to seek out that resource. And what the authors, Rosa Garcia and Sarah Librand, talked about were different categories of PLA policy. So policies around this idea of transparency, making PLA more visible and the policies more transparent, addressing cost and affordability, because PLA is something that's usually has to be paid for out of pocket. If there are fees associated with that, it's not covered by Title IV funds. Policies that talk about the methods of assessment that should be available and the types of PLA that are accepted. Credit limitations, if there's sort of a cap on the number or the percentage of a degree that can be earned through PLA, how the PLA shows up on the student's transcript, and then how to expand access to PLA. Just a couple noteworthy examples. There are a lot of policies actually around providing PLA to veterans and making sure that that's available. So for example, Michigan state law requires that once an applicant has submitted their military transcript, the institution must evaluate that transcript and notify the application about what credits are available to them for their military training. In terms of cost and affordability, best example so far is Indiana. A couple of years ago, they passed a law that allows students to use state financial aid dollars toward the cost associated with PLA. So right now, as I said before, federal dollars cannot be used for that. We hope that that changes at some point. But for now, if a state can make some resources available to have those fees covered, that it can be a big help. In terms of access, the Idaho State Board of Education has a policy that requires that prior learning is evaluated at a student's request. And so every institution must designate that at least there's one liaison or person or place to go to serve as a resource. And then in terms of access and quality assurance, there's a Washington statute that requires institutions and systems to collaborate in PLA policy development as their way to increase the number of students who are earning this type of credit, while ensuring that it's only awarded for high quality course level competencies. So there's that. We want to make sure that it's only awarded for the type of learning that is appropriate. I will provide all of these links in the chat as well, but if you'd like a full copy of the PLA study that we've been referencing this hour, or any of the PLA research briefs that Witchy has published this year, I'll put those links in the chat. And there's also a link to CAEL's annual conference, which is going to be in San Diego in person in November. So we're really excited about the chance to be in person, and there's a lot of great learning and peer learning that goes on around PLA, CPL at the CAEL conference every year. And finally, if there's a one hour micro course that CAEL is providing to anybody, the public, on understanding and serving your adult learners. So if you're interested at all in a 1 hour micro course, free of charge, please enjoy this on us. Okay, so I think we're ready for kind of opening the chat for, let me just put all these resources in there. And then let's take a look.
So there is one open question on the chat right now, which is, are there any states on the webinar that are trying to do statewide military articulation beyond what ACE recommends? So people can put their responses to that in the chat if there's attendees or presenters. Do you know any thoughts to that?
If anyone in the audience, do you have any? There in the policy brief that I think somebody put it in the chat, the policy brief by Clasp and Witchy last year, they do provide not just sort of some showcase policies, examples of policies in each of the different kinds of areas, but there's also links to other publications from previous years where you can see examples of things. And the other thing I would mention is Education Commission of the States periodically does a review of CPL, PLA state level policies that have been passed. And so you can go to their website. Again, it's Ed Commission of the States. And they have sort of their 50 state repository of examples of PLA. So if you're at all interested in sort of digging in on the policy questions, that would be a really great resource. I'm not sure when they last updated it. I'm sure it's within the last 2 years or so. So that it's not that out of date if it is any at all. So. Yes,
So
and I think we all are giving Matt kudos for presenting well on vacation from the parking lot.
I'm sorry for the background noise, but I did want to jump in and just say, in response to Holly's question, we saw from the 72 institution study that only 11% take-up rate. So that's a huge issue, that it's so underutilized. And that is in some ways reflective of what we see in employer tuition assistance programs. You know, that nationally is between 5 and 6% take-up rate. So it's like these things are available. We just need to make them more widely known for the broader population. And we need to make them more broadly available for very traditional institutions, which, you know, I've been fighting that good fight. I've been at the University of Louisville for 15 years now, and we have 3 majors that offer PLA credit, and that's not enough. So we are launching an interdisciplinary studies program, general studies program, and we're hoping that, again, when we get into other colleges, that they're going to see the merit and value of this, the rigor of the process, and start to expand opportunities for spaces where oftentimes it's elective credit. So I get a philosophical debate going with many of my colleagues about where PLA fits. Does it work for a major class? Does it work for general education? Of course, yes, CLAP and DSST. But think about what we do for our 17 and 18-year-olds. AP testing is basically a form of PLA. So if you're okay with that for a 17 or 18-year-old, why wouldn't you work with your middle level or executive level students to try and find college level and credit-worthy learning that matches up really well with either electives or possibly a little bit of the major? But again, this is not going to impact an institution's tuition source or revenue. It's a net positive revenue because we see that students that have access to PLA just grow retention, therefore they take more classes at the institution.
Yeah.
Matt, I want to jump in real quick. I really liked, and I don't remember whose slide it was, but the acknowledgement of a student's learning and knowledge and how key that is, particularly when we think about first generation students. Black and brown students who very often might have had different experiences with education and the value of that. I think about from my own personal experience where I had to take a stats course, a basic entry-level stats course 3 times. And the last time I went to the professor after the first week and said, I will turn in every single homework assignment and every single test by next week if I don't have to send this class for 15 weeks. Now, this was before PLA, and he thought really long and hard, but thought he couldn't do it for, bureaucratic reasons. So I had to sit through a class for 15 weeks. Well, think if you're a returning adult who's been out of the classroom for 10, 15 years, but has really significant military or work experience, where you're having to sit through a class for something that you already know and what that says to you and the messages that that's sending you. So I really appreciated that message.
Yeah. And I would add that when when sort of the PLA movement started in the 70s, there was a real clear social justice component to it. This idea of learning as being owned by the student, the student brings their own learning, they own the knowledge, and it's not so much that academia is the only source of knowledge, but rather that there's a more democratic approach, a more social justice approach to recognizing learning that happens in lots of different spaces. And PLA offers you the opportunity to really expand the definition of what counts as learning and knowledge, and it's really important. I'm working with the WICHE team right now to produce a follow-on brief that should be available late July, early August, I think, where we're diving in on this equity question, really looking at the question of why is it that we're seeing lower PLA usage rates for certain populations that we really care about. And we have some, I think, really important insights about this. Some of it has to do with this idea about really sort of expanding institutional definitions of what counts for learning. So if you're interested in getting on our mailing list for that, please do get in touch with me and I can make sure you're on our list to get that when it comes out. So.
And I know we're near time, but I do want to make one additional point for everybody out there that is considering trying to grow enrollment. This is your pathway into industry. All you have to do is walk down the street and go to the local HR office at whatever organization, mid-size or large or even small, and say, tell me about your training regimen. What kind of training database do you have for your employees? How can we as institutions review that, evaluate it, assess it, and then put it into our PLA database and let you know that if you use your tuition assistance dollars with us, they'll go a lot longer because we're going to acknowledge and value some of the training that happens within your organization towards college credit. So you don't have to spend as much as an organization. The student on the back end of that graduates virtually debt-free if they use your tuition assistance alongside PLA. So these are ways to recruit and bring more people into the fold that are sitting on the sidelines.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you. Oh, go ahead, Jason.
Can I just add one comment real quick? So I think, and maybe this is a good way to sort of think about CCA from a state perspective is, I think in some states, and I don't know the data that well, but my guess is that there's not a lot of sort of financial incentive for institutions to expand PLA. So I would love to see that because the type of thing that you just described, Matt, I think takes time and work and the motivation of someone like you. And I think, I'd love to see some state policy around financial resources to expand PLA.
Ditto, yeah.
And to Becky and Matt's point, at Complete College America, we talk a lot about moving away from a deficit-based approach to higher education in lots of ways, right? We think of that a lot around developmental education, but moving to an asset base, you just both talked about how acknowledging what students already bring to the table and where that fund of knowledge exists is truly an asset-based approach. And I appreciate, Jason, you being able to bring the deep research to this to counter some of the myths around PLA of, well, of course they have more credits because you gave it to them, that it goes way beyond that. And the quality standards that you talked about, Matt, where it's not just giving away credit, but students showing the competence of that course. So this is really a wonderful webinar. I want to thank Becky Klein-Collins from CAEL, Jason Taylor from the University of Utah, and Matt Bergman from the University of Louisville, and coming to us from a parking lot outside of Bouncy Castles. For everyone who is with us, we would love for you to come back in 2 weeks. On July 1st, we will be holding a webinar on student basic needs support, part of our ongoing CCA live webinars. We can't wait to see you then. Again, thank you, Becky, Jason, and Matt.
Thanks.